Welcome back to our weekly summary of Shakespeare's plays. Today we're speaking about Richard II, one of Shakespeare's most lyrical history plays. It's full of poetry about kingship, identity, and the divine right of rulers, a common theme for Shakespeare. It charts the fall of Richard II and the rise of Henry Bolingbroke, later Henry IV, who we'll be covering in the next 2 weeks. Richard's overconfident in divine right. He alienates his nobles with injustice, and Richard becomes a tragic figure, eloquent in the loss, but powerless. The Act 1, Scene 1 starts at the court at Westminster. King Richard presides as Henry Bolingbroke accuses Thomas Mowbray of treason. Bolingbroke claims Mowbray misused royal funds and was involved in the murder of the Duke of Gloucester. Richard tries to calm matters, but the rivals are implacable. Bolingbroke declares, "Pale, trembling coward, there I throw my gage." Mowbray accepts the challenge, insisting, "I am disgraced, impeached, and baffled here." Richard reluctantly permits a trial by combat. Now, in Scene 2, John of Gaunt's house. The Duchess of Gloucester, widow of the murdered Duke, appeals to John of Gaunt, that's Bolingbroke's father, for justice. She cries, "Edward's 7 sons, whereof thyself art one, were as 7 vials of his sacred blood." She urges him to avenge Gloucester's death, but Gaunt, loyal to the crown, refuses. God's is the quarrel, for God's substitute, his deputy anointed in his sight, hath caused his death. This establishes the theme of divine right. Kings are answerable to God alone. Scene 3. Coventry. It's the lists for combat. The combat begins with a ceremony. Richard interrupts as the Lords charge, abruptly halting the fight. He banishes Mowbray for life and Bolingbroke for 10 years, reduced to 6 after Gaunt's plea. Bolingbroke accepts with sorrow. Then England's ground farewell, sweet soil adieu. Mowbray departs in despair. The language I have learned these 40 years, my native English, now I must forego. Scene 4 is at Richard's court. Richard discusses Bolingbroke's popularity, hinting at some insecurity. News arrives that Irish rebels threaten his rule. Richard plans to seize Gaunt's wealth after his death to fund the campaign. Now we see that the absence of Bolingbroke is quite helpful to him. Act 1 has been a conflict erupting between Bolingbroke and Mowbray. Richard asserts authority, but alienates the nobles. The themes of divine right, exile, loyalty, and ambition emerge. Act 2, Scene 1 opens at Ely House. John of Gaunt, dying, delivers his famous patriotic speech on England, one of the best in Shakespeare. This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England. He warns Richard that misrule will ruin the nation. Richard dismisses him, and after his death seizes Gaunt's estates, disinheriting Bolingbroke. York protests. Take Hereford's rights away, and take from time his charters and his customary rights. But Richard is obstinate. Scene 2 is set in the palace. The Queen is troubled by omens. Green, Bagot and Bushy, Richard's flatterers, comfort her. But York denounces Richard's seizure of Bolingbroke's inheritance, and nobles quietly whisper of discontent. Scene 2 in Gloucestershire. Bolingbroke returns from exile with Northumberland, Ross and Willoughby. He insists, "I came but for mine own." Though claiming modesty, his allies foresee Richard's fall. Scene 4 is on the coast in Wales. Richard sails to Ireland. Welsh captain and soldiers despair, interpreting bad omens as sign of Richard's downfall. Act 2 has shown us Gaunt dies after warning Richard, who seizes his estates anyway, alienating the nobles, and Bolingbroke returns gaining allies. Themes of legitimacy, inheritance and the decay of kingship run through this act. Act 3, Scene 1 is at Bristol Castle. Bolingbroke captures Bushy and Green. He condemns them for corrupting the king. "You have misled a prince, a royal king," he says. They are executed. Bolingbroke presents himself as a restorer of justice. Act 3, Scene 2 is on the Welsh shore. Richard returns from Ireland. He reassures himself, "Not all the water in the rude sea can wash the balm from an anointed king." Again, king knows what he's doing. No one can question it. He's anointed by God. But despair creeps in. "For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings." This famous meditation underscores Richard's tragic awareness. Scene 3 moves to Flint Castle. Bolingbroke confronts Richard. Northumberland delivers Bolingbroke's demand for him for his inheritance, but Richard perceives the threat. "Down, down I come like glistering phaeton, wanting the manage of unruly jades." He agrees to meet Bolingbroke, though. In Scene 4, the Duke of York's garden, the Queen overhears York's gardener describing Richard's fall. "Our sea-walled garden, the whole land is full of weeds." She laments, sensing fate closing in on her husband. Act 3 has shown us Bolingbroke consolidates his support, and Richard, increasingly poetic and fatalistic, recognises his own decline. Themes of divine right versus political reality, identity, and power's fragility dominate Act 3. Act 4, Scene 1, in Westminster Hall. Bolingbroke accuses Ormel of treason. A dramatic quarrel breaks out among nobles throwing down gaugers. Richard enters, surrendering the crown. "With mine own tears I wash away my balm, with mine own hands I give away my crown." He compares himself to a mirror shattering his kingship. "For now hath time made me his numbering clock." Richard is stripped of power, humiliated in public, and Bolingbroke is proclaimed King Henry IV. Richard abdicates in a moving, symbolic scene, with themes of identity, ritual, theatricality of kingship, and deposition. But in Act 5, they're not finished with Richard. Scene 1 on a London street. Richard is led to the tower. The Queen begs to accompany him, but is denied. Richard consoles her. So two together weeping make one woe. They part in grief. In scene 2 at York's house, the Duke of York describes Richard's humiliating entry into London, comparing him to a one withered flowered. Ormel conspires treason, and York exposes him. In scene 2 at the court, Henry pardons Ormel after the Duchess of York pleads for him. A woman's tongue is mighty with a man, he says. This scene contrasts mercy with Richard's harsh fate. There will be no mercy for Richard. Scene 4 outside Pomfret Castle. Exton plots to kill Richard, interpreting Henry's vague words as a command. Have I no friend will rid me of this living fear? Scene 5 at Pomfret Castle, but inside this time. Richard imprisoned reflects deeply on time, identity, and his fall. I wasted time, and now doth time waste me. He is murdered by Exton, but dies fighting. That hand shall burn in never quenching fire that staggers thus my person. Scene 6 at Windsor Castle. Henry IV learns of Richard's death and is shocked. They love not poison that do poison need. He vows pilgrimage to atone for this death. I'll make a voyage to the Holy Land to wash the blood off from my guilty hand. A lot has happened in Act 5. Richard and the Queen part. Ormery is spared. Richard dies tragically, and Henry IV's reign begins under a shadow. There are themes of mortality, time, guilt, and divine justice. Overall, Richard II as a play charts the downfall of a king whose poetic self-awareness cannot save his throne. Like a car crash that he sees coming, Richard, overconfident in divine right, alienates his nobles by injustice, seizing Bolingbroke's inheritance and stealing it. Bolingbroke returns, gathers support, and forces Richard's abdication. Richard becomes a tragic, broken figure, eloquent in his loss, but powerless. Act 1 is about disputes at court. Bolingbroke and Mowbray are banished. Act 2 is John of Gaunt dies and Richard seizes his inheritance before Bolingbroke returns, understandably annoyed about this. Act 3, Bolingbroke grows strong while Richard despairs. Act 4, Richard abdicates in poignant ceremony. Act 5, Richard is imprisoned and murdered. Henry IV is uneasy on the throne, and this continues through the next few plays. As we'll see next week in Henry IV Part 1. The themes and key quotes from the play. The divine right of kings. Not all the water in the rough, rude sea can wash the balm from an anointed king. The decay of kingship. For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. Patriotism and decline. This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this England. Probably one of the most famous soliloquies in Shakespeare. Time and mortality. I wasted time, and now doth time waste me. and deposition and identity. With mine own tears I wash away my balm. I hope you enjoyed our brief summary of Richard II. Please do like and subscribe, and next week we'll be back with Henry IV Part 1, as Richard II feeds right into Henry IV Part 1, Part 2 and Henry V. Richard II sets the scene for what's often called the Henriad, the 3 plays that are all really about Henry V, and can be seen as the start of a quartet of plays. The BBC famously had The Hollow Crown, beginning with Richard II. So please do like and subscribe and come back next week.